What if I told you that one of the most glorified battles in history, the Battle of Normandy, is still misunderstood by most people today? That behind the cinematic storming of beaches lies a maze of secrets, brilliant deceptions, and last-minute decisions that almost didn't happen. You see, D-Day wasn't just a heroic moment. It was a calculated gamble, a miracle of coordination, a masterclass in leadership, innovation, and raw human grit. Now imagine standing in Eisenhower's shoes the night before, troops already aboard, ships, the sea turning violent, and a decision that could save or sacrifice thousands, all resting on a flicker of clearer skies. This wasn't destiny, it was discipline, strategy, and above all, trust. In people, in plans, in possibility. Yet most of what you think you know, it's just the surface. In this deep dive, you'll uncover the untold layers of the Battle of Normandy, the game-changing tech, the psychological warfare, the broken bunkers, and the silent heroes in the shadows. We'll peel back the myths and walk through the minds of commanders, soldiers, and resistance fighters who tilted the scales of World War II when everything was still uncertain. This isn't just history. It's a blueprint of how ordinary people faced extraordinary stakes and won. If you thought you knew D-Day, think again. Because what happened in Normandy didn't just change the war, it changed the world. They say, nothing great is achieved without preparation. And when it comes to the Battle of Normandy, that saying might just be an understatement. For over 2 long years, the Allies poured their energy, ingenuity, and pure grit into what would become the most intricate operation of World War II. Picture a chessboard the size of Europe, and every piece, from the tiniest commando to the largest battleship, had to move in flawless sync. This wasn't some haphazard gamble, it was a masterpiece of military choreography. And trust me, every single rehearsal was a high-stakes dress rehearsal for freedom. Imagine coordinating thousands of ships, troops, tanks, and planes, each with its own mission, each relying on the other to succeed. The logistics alone would make your head spin. But the Allies weren't just planning, they were innovating. They created entire fake armies, rubber tanks, and double agents to sell a false story to the Nazis. And it worked. The Germans were looking at Calais while Normandy was quietly becoming the true stormfront. Clever, absolutely necessary, without a doubt. What most people forget is that behind this colossal operation were ordinary folks turned heroes. Engineers building portable harbors, cooks preparing meals for armies, and medics organizing for the casualties no one wanted but everyone expected. Planning wasn't just about ships and bombs. It was about people, real people with beating hearts and nervous hands, all moving towards something bigger than themselves. Victory wasn't just on the map. It started in the minds and hearts of every Allied planner. And let's not forget the nerves of steel it took for Eisenhower and his command team to keep calm while the weight of the free world sat squarely on their shoulders. One wrong decision, one leak of intel, and the whole operation could have crumbled like a house of cards. Yet somehow, through discipline and sheer will, they kept their eyes locked on the prize. Operation Overlord wasn't just a plan. It was a bet on humanity's ability to rise in the darkest hour. But here's the kicker. All the planning in the world doesn't mean a thing if the battlefield itself doesn't matter. And that, my friend, brings us to the real question. Why Normandy? Of all the coasts, coves, and channels in Europe, why did Normandy become the chosen land for this massive gamble of World War II? Well, here's the thing. Normandy wasn't just a location. It was the linchpin. The Allies weren't just landing on a beach, they were staking their claim to the future of Europe. If this worked, the Western Front would be opened. If it didn't, well, let's just say the consequences would have been catastrophic. You see, the Battle of Normandy wasn't just a military maneuver, it was a moral message to the world. It said, we're coming back. For nations under Nazi rule, this was the first real sign that liberation wasn't a fantasy. And for the Axis, it was a chilling reminder that the Allies weren't backing down. This was the moment where silence ended and the boots of freedom hit the ground, literally. What made Normandy so strategic was its balance of surprise and access. Close enough to launch from Britain, yet far enough from Germany's radar, it offered the perfect blend of shock and opportunity. And here's the kicker. Had this invasion failed, Stalin's USSR might have been the only power to dominate Europe. Post-war, that's right. One failed operation could have changed the entire ideological makeup of the continent. So this wasn't just about defeating Hitler, it was about preserving democracy. Normandy became the doorway through which hope marched back into Europe, bayonet in hand, flag on its shoulder. It was here that the line was drawn, not in ink, but in blood and bravery. This wasn't just another offensive. This was the offensive that would mark the beginning of the end. And speaking of defenses, Hitler had his own plan, a wall, a long winding fortress of a thing meant to stop any such dream in its tracks. But how strong was this Atlantic wall, really? The Atlantic wall. Sounds intimidating, right? That was the idea. Hitler imagined this massive coastal defense line stretching from Norway all the way down to the French-Spanish border. Bunkers, artillery, landmines, underwater obstacles, you name it, they had it. On paper, it looked like an impenetrable iron curtain, but reality, let's just say paper doesn't always survive the storm. The truth is, the Atlantic Wall was more like a patchwork than a fortress. Sure, some sections were heavily fortified, especially around Calais, where Hitler thought the Allies would land. Normandy, though, it was a weak spot. The German leadership hadn't finished construction there and didn't expect it to be the main target. Classic case of putting all your bets on the wrong horse. Meanwhile, Eisenhower was quietly moving, his chess pieces into place. What's wild is that even with its flaws, the Atlantic Wall still put up a fight. Think machine gun nests, heavy artillery, beach obstacles designed to shred landing craft. This wasn't a stroll on the beach, especially at places like Omaha, where Allied troops were thrown into a meat grinder of bullets and chaos. It was brutal. It was hell. But even the fiercest walls can't stop men driven by something greater than fear. And here's where things get interesting. The wall wasn't just about cement and steel. It was about propaganda. Hitler needed to appear invincible. That image of invulnerability was key to keeping occupied Europe in check. But like many illusions, the Atlantic Wall cracked under pressure, revealing just how vulnerable that supposed superpower had become when faced with real courage. Still, even a weak wall is a wall, and storming through it wasn't going to be easy. That's where technology came in, big time. Because when you're facing bunkers and barbed wire, sometimes innovation is your best weapon. Now, here's where it gets fun. Because when brute force meets brain power, history tends to notice. The Battle of Normandy wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a showcase of some of the most cutting-edge tech the world had ever seen. You think modern warfare is impressive? Wait till you hear how these folks hacked 1944. From amphibious tanks to portable harbors, the Allies weren't just fighting smart, they were reinventing the battlefield. Let's start with those Sherman Fireflies. These weren't your average tanks. They were dragon slayers, loaded with powerful 17-pounder guns that could take out German Panthers and Tigers with a single hit. The Germans didn't expect that. Neither did most of the Allies, to be honest. But innovation was the name of the game. Whether it was flail tanks clearing mines or DD tanks swimming ashore like oversized sea turtles, every invention had a deadly purpose. Break the wall, save lives. And we can't forget the Sky Warriors. Aircraft like the P-51 Mustang and the Typhoon turned the skies into a nightmare for German ground forces. They weren't just dropping bombs, they were clearing roads, killing tanks, cutting off reinforcements. Air superiority wasn't a luxury, it was a lifeline. If you were an Allied soldier moving inland, hearing those engines meant backup was on the way. It meant you weren't alone. Oh, and the Mulberry harbors. Genius. Imagine floating cities built in secret, hauled across the channel, then sunk into place to become instant ports. That's right, portable logistics hubs so the Allies could unload troops, tanks, food and ammunition right onto the beach. It was like the IKEA of warfare. Assemble it where you need it, use it to change the world. But let's be honest, even with all that tech, victory still hinged on knowing where and when to strike. That's where intelligence came in, and the mind games played behind the curtain were just as intense as the battles on the beach. You ever hear that saying, wars are won in the shadows before they're ever won on the field? That's exactly what happened in the lead-up to the Battle of Normandy. While German officers paced inside bunkers and studied outdated maps, the Allies were already 10 moves ahead, thanks to spies, codebreakers, and enough deception to make a magician blush. The battlefield started in the mind, and the Allies played that game like grandmasters. Let's talk enigma. Cracking that code was like turning on a light in a dark room. You could suddenly see everything the enemy was planning. And thanks to Bletchley Park's brilliance, the Allies had a front-row seat to German movements, strategies, and even weaknesses. They didn't just prepare for Normandy, they knew what was coming, and they adjusted course before the enemy even blinked. But the real magic trick? Operation Fortitude, an elaborate web of lies and decoys designed to convince Hitler that the invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. They used inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, and even a phony army under General Patton to sell the illusion. The result? German reinforcements stayed put while the real invasion stormed in from the west. It wasn't luck. It was psychological warfare, executed to perfection. And then there were the French resistance fighters, unsung heroes who sabotaged rail lines, cut communication wires, and passed along vital intel like shadows in the night. These weren't trained soldiers. They were bakers, teachers, farmers, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Their bravery helped carve open the path that Allied troops would march through. Quietly, invisibly, they changed the course of the war. Still, all the brainpower in the world wouldn't mean much without the muscle to back it up. And when the sky started rumbling and the horizon filled with steel, well, that's when the next phase began. Before a single boot touched the sands of Normandy, the sky had already begun to roar. The Allies knew that to make the Battle of Normandy winnable, they had to dominate not just on land, but from above and beyond. So in came the bombers, the fighters, the destroyers. It wasn't just military might, it was a thunderous symphony of strategy. If Germany controlled the roads, the Allies erased them from the air. Picture this: night raids torching rail lines, daylight bombings leveling communication hubs, and entire convoys of planes blackening the skies before dawn. The goal wasn't just to create destruction, it was to create chaos, to paralyze Germany's ability to reinforce, resupply, or even react. It was shock and awe before shock and awe became a military doctrine, and it worked like a charm. Meanwhile, out at sea, the Allies were orchestrating the largest naval invasion the world had ever seen. Over 5,000 ships, imagine that, surged toward the French coast, carrying troops, tanks, ammo, dreams. And behind those ships, floating artillery platforms, destroyers and cruisers shelling German bunkers with pinpoint accuracy. It wasn't just noise, it was a message. We're coming, try and stop us. And let's not forget the precision coordination between sea, air, and land units. Bombers would soften targets, naval guns would finish them, then ground troops would move in, guided by smoke, flares, and radio. It was synchronized destruction, but beneath all that noise was harmony. Harmony that saved lives, cleared paths, and cracked open the coastal defenses faster than the Germans could blink. But even with all that overwhelming firepower, nothing could guarantee success once the ramps dropped and the beach gates opened. Because at that point, it was no longer about ships or planes, it was about men. And the landing. Oh, the landing was unlike anything the world had ever seen. June 6, 1944, D-Day. When the ramps went down and the bullets started flying, there was no turning back. The Battle of Normandy officially erupted, and it wasn't uniform. Some beaches turned into bloodbaths, others into breakthroughs. At Omaha, Allied troops were met with a wall of fire, machine guns ripping through the surf. Men didn't just wade through water, they crawled through hell with grit in their teeth and purpose in their hearts. Utah Beach, a different story. Due to a miscalculation, ironically a lucky one, troops landed slightly off target and found lighter defenses. They pushed through faster, linking up with airborne divisions already wreaking havoc inland. Then there were the British and Canadian sectors, Gold, Juno and Sword, where specially modified tanks called funnies rolled, in with flamethrowers, bridge layers and mine flails. Yes, tanks that cleared mines while dancing through beach obstacles. Innovation meets courage. But let's not sugarcoat it. Every beach had its own nightmare. German pillboxes were built to kill, and many did their job too well. Waves of soldiers were mowed down before they even reached cover. But you know what separates a good plan from a great one? Adaptability. And those soldiers, battered and bruised, adapted. They climbed cliffs, blew open bunkers, turned terror into tenacity. You also had the engineers, the unsung heroes with wire cutters and flamethrowers, clearing paths under fire. No glory, no headlines, just pure bravery. Some had to drag tanks through muck. Others used Bangalore torpedoes to blow holes in German defenses. And don't even get me started on the medics, running into gunfire to save lives. It was chaos. Yes, but also an explosion of courage that defied logic. Still, coordinating that level of madness, that required leaders willing to make gut-wrenching decisions under pressure. And behind every beachhead gained was a command post full of risk, rivalry, and relentless stress. When we talk about the Battle of Normandy, we often spotlight the soldiers on the beaches, but let's not forget the storm happening behind the scenes. Eisenhower wasn't just overseeing an invasion, he was holding together a fragile alliance of egos, nations, and military doctrines. Imagine trying to get generals from different countries with wildly different strategies to play nice. Herding cats? Try herding lions with battle plans. Take Eisenhower and Montgomery, for example. Monty wanted to lead a bold, centralized punch through Normandy. Eisenhower preferred a broad front approach. Add in Patton, still waiting in the wings because of fortitude, and you've got fireworks waiting to go off. But somehow, these titans found a rhythm. It wasn't always smooth and egos definitely clashed, but the mission always came first. Unity under pressure, that's rare and powerful. Then you had Rommel, the Desert Fox, on the German side. Brilliant, tactical, and constantly hamstrung by Hitler's delusions. Rommel knew the invasion would come, and he suspected Normandy. But Hitler insisted on controlling reserves personally, refusing to move key panzer divisions until it was too late. Micromanagement meet military disaster. It was like playing chess with one hand tied and your king hiding under the table. But here's the deeper truth. Leadership in Normandy wasn't just about battle plans. It was about trust. Trusting. Scouts trusting intelligence, trusting your gut. Eisenhower even wrote a letter taking full responsibility for failure in case D-Day went sideways. That's not just leadership, that's character. Because when everything hangs in the balance, the weight of silence before a decision is louder than any explosion. And yet, decisions alone weren't enough. Behind every command was an army waiting to move, an ocean waiting to be crossed, and a logistical puzzle that would make a Swiss watchmaker sweat. Think about this for a second. The Battle of Normandy wasn't just the largest amphibious assault in history, it was the largest coordination of moving parts the world had ever seen. Over 5,300 ships, nearly 11,000 aircraft, and 160,000 troops hitting 5 beaches in under 24 hours. It wasn't just war. It was choreography on a colossal scale, and every missed cue could have meant catastrophe. The logistics behind D-Day were absolutely mind-blowing. From timing tide patterns to scheduling airdrops, every single second mattered. Supplies had to be loaded in a precise sequence. Paratroopers had to land just right. If one link in the chain failed, the whole plan could unravel. And remember, they didn't have today's GPS or cloud-based comms. They were working with chalkboards, field radios, and raw nerve. And this wasn't just a British or American show. Canadians, Australians, French resistance, Polish pilots, the list goes on. Different languages, uniforms, weapons, tactics, yet somehow everyone clicked into place. It's like assembling a massive IKEA set with pieces from 12 different boxes, no instruction manual, and a ticking clock counting down to enemy fire. Oh, and the whole thing had to float, fly, and fight. Let's not overlook the incredible feat of transporting everything. We're talking about tanks, jeeps, artillery, fuel, food, water, spare parts, medical gear, down to the last bullet. And bandage. The Allies even shipped prefab roads and bridges to lay down once they got ashore. The sheer volume of it would make Amazon Prime look like a lemonade stand. But even the best logistics can't outmaneuver Mother Nature. And right before the big day, the skies turned ugly. The waves roared, the wind screamed, the whole operation hung by a thread. And then, just as quickly as the storm rolled in, something changed. Here's the part they don't tell you in history class. The fate of the Battle of Normandy, and maybe World War II itself, was nearly decided by the weather forecast. Picture it, June 1944. The invasion force is ready. Troops are loaded. Ships are in the channel. And then the sky turns mean. Waves swell, rain pours, and visibility drops to almost nothing. You're not just fighting an enemy now, you're fighting the elements. Eisenhower had the weight of the world on his shoulders, and the skies weren't cooperating. Advisors told him to postpone. Generals were on edge. Troops were getting seasick just waiting. One bad call could mean thousands of lives lost for nothing. But then, like a miracle, a tiny window appeared. Just 24 hours of slightly clearer weather. Not ideal, but just enough. Eisenhower took a breath and said the words that changed history. Okay, let's go. That decision wasn't just tactical. It was spiritual. It was the moment when resolve met uncertainty and courage stepped in to finish what planning alone could not. Soldiers had to be remobilized. Ships had to redirect. Pilots had to recalibrate. And they did it all under the whisper of a storm, ready to come back at any minute. Every wave crashing against those transport ships carried the tension of that choice. And what's wild is that the Germans didn't expect it. They thought the weather was too rough for any sane commander to launch an invasion. Rommel had even gone home to celebrate his wife's birthday. Troops were on reduced alert. Tanks were positioned inland. Normandy, in their minds, was safe. But they didn't know what Eisenhower knew. Fortune favors the bold, and the bold were already on their way. So there it was. The storm calmed just long enough for destiny to come ashore. Now that you've seen how it all came together, let's take a step back to understand why it changed the course of the entire World War. So now that you've seen the full picture, the brains, the brawn, the heartbreak, and the sheer brilliance behind the Battle of Normandy, let me ask you this. What part of the story spoke loudest to you? Was it the relentless preparation, the quiet courage of the resistance, or maybe the fact that the entire operation hinged on a single day of breakable weather? History isn't just about dates and names, it's about choices, about the moments. When people decided to rise, even when the odds said, "Sit down," Normandy reminds us that no victory, on a battlefield or in life, comes without risk, without faith, and without the invisible army behind the scenes making it all work. Whether you're facing your own storm or building something bigger than yourself, there's something in this story for you. So here's your challenge. How can you lead with that same kind of courage? Where in your life can you prepare better, decide bolder, or act faster, even if the skies aren't perfectly clear? Because if Normandy taught us anything, it's that waiting for perfect conditions is a luxury the brave can't afford. If this journey gave you something to think about, something to feel, then do yourself a favor. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of the deeper stories behind the world we live in. We're just getting started.